December 1943. The skies over Nazi Germany belonged to them. Their Luftwaffe ruled the air with absolute authority, and no Allied bomber crew expected to return home alive. But high above the frozen clouds, something was coming that would shatter everything the Germans believed about air superiority, about American engineering, and about the war itself. They called it the Mustang. The Germans called it der Silberne Geist, the Silver Ghost. And what happened next would turn the greatest air force in the world into hunted prey in their own skies. Stay with us to discover how a single American fighter plane destroyed the myth of German invincibility. Watch until the end to hear the true accounts from both sides of this incredible story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. December 1943. The war in Europe had reached a brutal stalemate in the air. American B-17 flying fortresses flew deep into German territory every day, carrying tons of bombs toward factories, railways, and oil refineries. The missions were called strategic bombing, but the crews had another name for them: suicide runs. The numbers told a horrifying story. Of every 100 bombers that took off from English airfields, nearly 30 never returned, shot down, blown apart, or crippled so badly they crashed into the sea. The life expectancy of a bomber crew member was just 11 missions. Most men never made it past their 5th. The reason was simple and terrifying. German fighters owned the sky. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf Fw 190 were fast, deadly, and flown by pilots who had been fighting since 1939. They knew every trick, every angle, every weak spot on an American bomber. They attacked in waves, diving from above, firing cannons that could tear a B-17's wing clean off. Lieutenant Paul Hendricks sat in the nose of his bomber, Lucky Strike, watching the horizon through frosted glass. He was a navigator, 22 years old, from a small farm in Iowa. This was his 4th mission. He knew the odds. "Fighters at 10 o'clock high," the tail gunner screamed over the radio. Hendricks felt his stomach drop. The black dots appeared like insects against the pale winter sky. Then they grew larger, closer, the sound of engines screaming as they dove. The first burst of cannon fire ripped through the fuselage. Metal shrieked, glass shattered. One of the waist gunners collapsed without a sound. Blood sprayed across the interior walls. Hendricks gripped his charts, unable to move, unable to breathe. "Hold formation," the pilot shouted. "Stay tight." But formations didn't matter when the enemy was faster, more experienced, and everywhere at once. Another B-17 ahead exploded in midair, an orange fireball against the gray clouds. Parachutes bloomed like white flowers, fragile and doomed. The Luftwaffe pilots were relentless. They knew the American escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, couldn't follow the bombers all the way to the target. The Allied fighters had to turn back after crossing into Germany, leaving the bombers alone for the final stretch. That gap, that deadly window of time, was where the slaughter happened. Oberleutnant Franz Weber sat in the cockpit of his Fw 190, eyes sharp, hands steady. He was 27, a veteran of over 200 combat missions. His plane bore 13 kill markings on the side, small silhouettes of American bombers. He watched the formation below through his gun sight. They flew in tight boxes, bristling with machine guns. But it didn't matter. They were slow, predictable, and today, like every day, they were alone. "Attack in pairs," he called over the radio to his wingman. "Target the lead bomber, go!" They dove together, engines howling. The bombers opened fire, tracers arcing through the air like burning ribbons. But Weber didn't flinch. He had done this 100 times before. He squeezed the trigger. His cannons roared. The lead bomber's number 3 engine erupted in flames. The plane shuddered, fell out of formation, and began its long spiral toward the earth. Weber pulled up hard, feeling the G-forces press him into a seat. He banked left, circling for another pass. His wingman followed. "This is too easy," his wingman said over the radio, almost laughing. Weber didn't reply. He had learned not to celebrate until he was back on the ground, but deep down, he agreed. The Americans were brave, but bravery wasn't enough. The Luftwaffe was simply better. Back in England, the losses were devastating. Entire squadrons wiped out. Men who laughed over breakfast were gone by dinner. The airfields were haunted by the sound of empty beds and unanswered mail.
General Carl Spaatz, commander of the U.S. 8th Air Force, stood in his office staring at casualty reports. The numbers were unsustainable. If this continued, the bombing campaign would collapse. Germany would win the air war by attrition. "We need something," he said to his staff, "something that can go all the way, something that can fight." One officer hesitated, then spoke. "Sir, there's a plane. It's been tested in England. North American Aviation built it. They're calling it the P-51 Mustang." Spaatz looked up. "What's so special about it?" "It has range, sir. With drop tanks, it can escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back, and it's fast, faster than anything the Germans have." Spaatz's jaw tightened. "Then why the hell aren't we using it?" "Because until now, no one believed it could work." The P-51 Mustang was born from desperation, not genius. In 1940, the British desperately needed fighter planes. They approached North American Aviation, a small company in California, and asked them to build a new fighter from scratch in just 120 days. It was an impossible deadline. Most aircraft took years to develop, but the lead designer, a man named Edgar Schmid, believed it could be done. He had fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s and knew exactly what kind of plane was needed to defeat the Luftwaffe. He designed the Mustang with one goal: speed and efficiency. Its sleek fuselage had almost no drag. Its laminar flow wings cut through the air like a knife, and most importantly, it had space for massive fuel tanks. The first prototypes were impressive but flawed. The original Allison engine didn't perform well at high altitudes. British test pilots liked the plane, but said it wasn't good enough to fight the B-109. Then someone had an idea. What if they replaced the engine? The British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same one used in the legendary Spitfire, was mated to the Mustang's airframe. The result was a revolution. Suddenly, the Mustang could climb higher, fly faster, and maneuver better than anything in the sky. By late 1943, the first P-51Bs began arriving in England. American pilots looked at them with curiosity and doubt. The plane was beautiful, sleek, and silver, almost delicate-looking. It didn't look like a killer. Captain Robert Duke Fletcher was assigned to fly one. He was a fighter pilot from Texas, 24 years old, with a confident swagger and a deep distrust of anything new.
"Looks like a Dan race car," he muttered, running his hand along the polished metal. "How's it supposed to fight?" His crew chief grinned. "You'll see, Captain. This thing's got teeth." Fletcher climbed into the cockpit. The interior was tight, efficient, and surprisingly comfortable. The controls felt responsive. The visibility was excellent, far better than the old P-40s he'd flown before. When he fired up the engine, the Merlin roared to life with a deep, throaty growl. The whole plane vibrated with power. He taxied to the runway, gave the thumbs up, and pushed the throttle forward. The Mustang leaped into the air like it had been shot from a cannon. The acceleration was breathtaking. Within seconds, he was climbing at a steep angle, the English countryside shrinking below. Fletcher grinned. "Okay, sweetheart, let's see what you can do." He pushed the stick forward and dove. The airspeed indicator climbed rapidly. 300 miles per hour, 350, 400, 450. The plane was rock steady. No vibration, no flutter. He pulled up hard, testing the G limits. The Mustang responded instantly. graceful and brutal at the same time. For the first time in months, Fletcher felt something he hadn't felt since the war began: hope. Back at the base, he found his squadron commander. "Sir, this plane is going to change everything." The commander nodded slowly. "Let's hope you're right, because if it doesn't, we're going to lose this war in the air."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. January 1944. The first P-51 Mustangs began flying escort missions deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe pilots had heard rumors of a new American fighter, but they dismissed them. Every plane the Americans had sent so far had been inferior. Why would this one be different? Franz Weber sat in the ready room at his airfield near Frankfurt, playing cards with his wingmen. The alarm bell rang. American bombers inbound. Heavy formation, high altitude. "Same as always," one pilot said, shuffling the deck. "We'll be back in an hour." Weber nodded, but something felt different today. The intelligence officer had mentioned something unusual. Long-range escorts reported all the way to the target zone. "Impossible," another pilot said. "No fighter has that range." Weber pulled on his flight suit and walked toward his Fw-190. The ground crew had her fueled and armed. 13 kills painted on the fuselage. He touched each one for luck. The squadron took off in formation, climbing through thick cloud cover. At 25,000 feet, they broke into clear sky, and there, ahead of them, was the bomber formation. But this time, something was wrong. High above the bombers, glinting in the winter sun, were fighters. Not P-47s, not P-38s. These were different, sleek, silver, and moving fast. "What are those?" Weber's wingman asked. Before anyone could answer, the silver planes dove. They came down like hawks, faster than anything Weber had ever seen. Their wings flashed as they opened fire. One Bf-109 exploded instantly. Another spun out of control, trailing smoke. Weber tried to turn into the attack, but the silver plane was already past him, climbing back into the sun. It was gone before he could even line up a shot. "Break left! Break left!" someone screamed over the radio. Chaos erupted. The silver fighters were everywhere, slashing through the German formations with terrifying speed. They didn't dogfight, they struck fast and vanished. Weber finally got a clear look at one as it flashed past. The plane had a bubble canopy, a long nose, and a sleek body. American markings, and it was pulling away from him effortlessly. He pushed his throttle to maximum, trying to catch it, but the distance only grew. His Fw-190, one of the fastest fighters in the Luftwaffe, was being left behind like it was standing still. For the first time in his career, Franz Weber felt fear. "What is that thing?" his wingman shouted. Weber didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain. The rules of the air war had just changed. Back in England, Duke Fletcher landed his Mustang and climbed out, sweat soaking his flight suit. His hands were shaking from adrenaline. He had just scored his first kill. "How'd she handle?" his crew chief asked. Fletcher looked at the silver plane, still warm from battle, and smiled. "Like a damn ghost. They never saw me coming." Word spread quickly. The P-51 had arrived. And the Luftwaffe, for the first time since the war began, was no longer invincible. February 1944. The appearance of the Mustangs sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. Pilots who had dominated the skies for years were now being shot down in alarming numbers. Veteran aces, men with dozens of kills, were falling to these silver American planes. Franz Weber survived his first encounter, but many of his friends did not. The squadron lost 4 pilots in 1 week. Men he had flown with for years, men who seemed untouchable, were gone. The debriefings were grim. Every surviving pilot told the same story. The American plane was faster, climbed better, and had incredible range. Worse, the American pilots were getting bolder. They no longer just defended the bombers, they hunted. Oberst Heinrich Krauss, the base commander, stood before the assembled pilots.
His face was hard, his voice colder than the winter air. "Gentlemen, we are facing a new threat. The Americans have deployed a fighter that matches or exceeds our capabilities. Intelligence confirms it is the P-51 Mustang. As of today, our mission priority changes. When you encounter these aircraft, disengage if possible. Focus on the bombers." A murmur ran through the room. Disengage. Retreat. The idea was unthinkable. Weber raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, if we don't engage them, they'll shoot us down anyway." Krause's jaw tightened. "Then you'll have to be smarter, faster, better. Because if we keep losing pilots at this rate, we won't have a Luftwaffe left." The room fell silent. That night, Weber sat in his barracks writing a letter to his younger brother, a trainee pilot stationed in Bavaria. "The war has changed," he wrote. "The Americans have a plane now that we cannot match. Do not believe the propaganda. Do not believe the officers who say we are still superior. If you are sent to the Western Front, fly carefully. And if you see a silver plane with a bubble canopy, run." He sealed the letter and placed it in his locker. He didn't know if his brother would ever receive it, but he had to try. Meanwhile, high above the clouds, Duke Fletcher and his squadron were preparing for another mission. This time, they weren't just escorting bombers. They were going hunting. "Orders are simple," the briefing officer said. "Sweep ahead of the bomber stream. Engage any enemy aircraft. Clear the skies."
Fletcher looked at his wingman, a young pilot named Tommy Grant. Tommy was 19, fresh out of training, still learning. "Stick close to me," Fletcher said. "Don't try to be a hero, just stay on my wing and watch my six." Tommy nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." They took off at dawn, 12 Mustangs climbing into the frozen sky. The bombers would follow an hour later, but by then, Fletcher's squadron would already be over Germany, hunting for targets. At 28,000 feet, they leveled off. The sky was crystal clear. Below, the German countryside stretched out like a patchwork quilt, rivers frozen white, forests dark green. "Bandits, 11 o'clock low," someone called over the radio. Fletcher saw them, a formation of Bf 109s climbing toward the bomber route. They hadn't seen the Mustangs yet. "Let's go," Fletcher said calmly. "Attack from above, hit fast." They rolled into a dive, engines screaming. The Mustangs plummeted like falcons, speed building rapidly. The German fighters still hadn't noticed. Fletcher lined up his gun sight on the last plane in the formation. His finger hovered over the trigger. Wait. Wait. Closer. He fired. The 6.5 caliber machine guns roared. Tracers lanced through the air, converging on the target. The Bf 109's engine exploded in a spray of fire and metal. The plane rolled over and fell. The German formation scattered in panic, but there was nowhere to go. The Mustangs were everywhere, faster, higher, deadlier. Fletcher pulled up and banked hard, looking for another target. A FW-190 tried to dive away. Fletcher followed, his Mustang accelerating effortlessly. The German pilot twisted and turned, desperate, but Fletcher stayed glued to his tail. He fired again. Short burst. The FW-190's canopy shattered. The plane wobbled, then spun out of control. "Splash 2, Fletcher said into his radio. All around him, the sky was filled with smoke trails and falling planes. In less than 3 minutes, the entire German formation was destroyed. Tommy Grant's voice came over the radio, shaking. "Is it always like this?" Fletcher didn't answer right away. He watched the wreckage spiral toward the earth, dark shapes against the white snow. "No," he finally said. "It used to be us getting shot down. Not anymore." By March 1944, the impact of the Mustang was undeniable. American bomber losses dropped dramatically. Luftwaffe losses soared. German fighter pilots, who had once attacked with confidence, now hesitated, scanning the sky for silver planes.
The psychological effect was devastating. The Luftwaffe had built its reputation on superiority, on the belief that German engineering and German courage were unbeatable. The Mustang shattered that belief. Franz Weber flew his 15th mission since the Mustangs appeared. He had stopped counting kills. Now, he only counted survival. During one mission, he watched helplessly as a Mustang destroyed 3 of his squadron's planes in less than a minute. The American pilot was relentless, precise, surgical. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. Weber radioed his wingman. "Fall back, we can't fight them head-on." But his wingman, a young pilot named Dieter, ignored the order. He turned hard, trying to engage the Mustang. It was a fatal mistake. The American plane rolled inverted, dove underneath Dieter's turn, and came up firing. Dieter's plane disintegrated in midair. Weber felt something break inside him. Not fear, not anger, just cold, bitter understanding. They were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Back at the base, the mood was dark. Pilots sat in silence, staring at empty chairs. The replacements who arrived were younger, less trained, more afraid. One evening, Oberst Krause gathered the remaining veterans. "Berlin wants results. They want more kills, more bomber formations destroyed." Weber stood. "Sir, we can't destroy the bombers if we are being destroyed ourselves. The Mustang has changed everything. We need better planes, better tactics. Or we need to stop pretending we can win." Krause's face went pale. "That is defeatist talk, Oberleutnant. That is reality, sir."
The room was silent. No one disagreed. Across the channel, Duke Fletcher was promoted to squadron leader. His kill count had reached 9. The Mustang pilots were becoming legends, their names spoken with awe in bomber crews and ground staff alike. But Fletcher didn't feel like a hero. Every kill was another man who wouldn't go home, another family receiving a telegram. One night, he found Tommy Grant sitting alone by the runway, staring at the stars. "You okay, kid?" Tommy didn't look at him. "I shot down a German today. Watched him bail out. His parachute didn't open." Fletcher sat down beside him. "Yeah, I've seen that too. Does it ever get easier?" "No," Fletcher said honestly. "But if we don't do it, more of our guys die. That's the math." Tommy nodded slowly. "I just wish there was another way." Fletcher looked up at the stars, cold and distant. "Me too, kid. Me too." By April 1944, the Mustang had become the dominant fighter in European skies. The Luftwaffe was still dangerous, still deadly, but it was no longer invincible. And deep in their hearts, both sides knew the truth. The war in the air was over. The Silver Ghost had won.
May 1944. The Mustang squadrons had become a plague upon the Luftwaffe. Every day brought new losses, new funerals, new gaps in the formations that would never be filled. The German High Command issued desperate orders: avoid the American escorts, focus on the bombers. But it was impossible advice. The Mustangs were everywhere. Franz Weber had stopped sleeping well. Every night he saw the faces of pilots he'd known. Every morning he climbed into his FW-190, knowing this might be his last flight. The mathematics of survival had turned against them. It was no longer a question of if, but when. The airfield near Frankfurt had changed. Where once there had been laughter and confidence, now there was only silence and cigarette smoke. The replacement pilots arrived weekly, boys of 18 and 19 with barely 100 hours of flight time. They listened wide-eyed to the veterans' warnings, but nothing could prepare them for what awaited above the clouds. Weber watched one replacement, a kid named Stefan, climb into his Bf 109 for the first time. The boy's hands trembled as he fastened his harness. Weber walked over and tapped on the canopy. "Listen to me," Weber said through the glass. "When you see the silver planes, don't try to be a hero. Turn away. Live to fight another day." Stefan nodded, but Weber could see the determination in his eyes. The propaganda still worked on the young ones. They still believed in glory. 3 hours later, Stefan's plane returned in pieces, carried by a farmer's truck. The wreckage was barely recognizable. The Mustangs had shredded it. That evening, Oberst Kraus called another briefing. His face had aged 10 years in 3 months. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. The Iron Cross on his chest seemed heavier than before. "Berlin has authorized a new defensive strategy," he announced. "We will concentrate our forces, mass formations of 50 to 100 fighters attacking single bomber groups. Overwhelm them with numbers before the escorts can respond." Weber raised his hand. "Sir, the Mustangs have auxiliary fuel tanks. They're already at the target when we arrive. Massing our forces just gives them more targets."
Kraus's expression hardened. "Do you have a better suggestion, Oberleutnant?" Weber paused. Then, quietly, "Yes, sir. Surrender." The room erupted. Pilots shouted. Some called him a coward. Others looked away, unable to meet his eyes. But a few, the oldest veterans, nodded slowly. Kraus slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! We follow orders. We fight. That is all." But everyone in that room knew the truth. They were fighting a war they had already lost. Across the English Channel, the mood couldn't have been more different. Duke Fletcher's squadron had become one of the most decorated fighter units in the 8th Air Force. Their tally stood at 63 confirmed kills in just 4 months. The pilots were treated like celebrities. Reporters came to interview them. Their photos appeared in newspapers back home. But the glory felt hollow to Fletcher. Each kill was another statistic, another man who wouldn't see his family again. The mathematics worked in his favor now, but the moral weight remained the same. One afternoon, a photographer from Life magazine asked him to pose beside his Mustang. The plane bore 15 kill markings now, small swastikas painted beneath the cockpit. "Give us a smile, Captain," the photographer said. "America wants to see its heroes." Fletcher forced to grin, but it felt like wearing a mask. Tommy Grant stood nearby, watching. His count was up to 4. Still alive, still haunted. After the photo session, Fletcher found Tommy in the mess hall, staring at his food. "You gonna eat that?" Fletcher asked. Tommy pushed the plate away, not hungry. Fletcher sat down. "Talk to me." Tommy looked up, his eyes red. "I keep seeing their faces, the German pilots. Some of them are just kids, Duke, younger than me." "I know." "Then how do you keep doing it?" Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. "Because if I don't, they kill our bomber crews, and those are our guys, our friends. That's the only way I can live with it." Tommy nodded slowly, but Fletcher could see the doubt still lingering. War had a way of destroying innocence faster than bullets destroyed planes. The next morning, they flew another mission, deep penetration into Bavaria. The target was an aircraft factory. Intelligence reported heavy defenses. As they crossed into German airspace, the radio crackled. "Bandits, 12 o'clock level, big formation, looks like 50 plus." Fletcher's pulse quickened. This was the new German tactic, mass attack, desperation in the form of overwhelming numbers. "Stay tight," Fletcher ordered. "We go through them, not around them." The German formation came into view, a black swarm rising from below. Bf-109s, FW-190s, even some older Bf-110 twin-engine fighters. all climbing toward the bombers. "Here we go," Fletcher muttered. The two formations collided like storm fronts. The sky erupted into chaos. Planes twisted and turned, tracer fire crisscrossing in every direction. The roar of engines and gunfire was deafening, even through the radio static. Fletcher dove into the mass, guns blazing. A Bf-109 exploded in front of him. He pulled up hard, inverted, and came down on another. His wing work was instinctive now, muscle memory honed by months of combat. But the Germans were fighting differently today, more aggressively, more desperately. They ignored the Mustangs and went straight for the bombers. Fletcher saw 3 FW-190s make a suicide run at a B-17. They fired everything they had, then 2 of them rammed the bomber. All 4 planes disintegrated in a massive fireball. "Jesus Christ," someone said over the radio. The battle lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, the sky was empty except for smoke and falling debris. The Germans had lost 27 fighters. The Americans lost 6 bombers and 2 Mustangs. Fletcher counted his squadron as they regrouped. Tommy's plane was damaged but flying. Everyone else made it. "Let's go home," Fletcher said quietly. The flight back was silent. No one celebrated, no one spoke. They had won, but it felt like drowning in blood.
June 1944. D-Day had come and gone. Allied forces were now fighting on French soil. The bombing campaign intensified. More missions, more targets, more death. Franz Weber sat in his barracks, writing another letter to his brother. His hands were steady now. Fear had been replaced by a cold, numb acceptance. "Carl," he wrote, "if you receive this, it means I am gone. Do not mourn me. I made my choices, but learn from my mistakes. We were told we were superior. We were told we could not lose. Both were lies. The Americans built a better plane not because they were smarter, but because they were free to innovate. Our system demanded obedience. Theirs rewarded creativity. That difference decided the war." He sealed the letter and placed it with the others. 14 letters, one for each friend he had lost. That night, the alarm sounded again. American bombers inbound. Heavy escort. Weber suited up mechanically, pulled on his gloves, checked his parachute, walked to his plane. The routine was so familiar it felt like sleepwalking. His FW-190 started on the first try. The engine's roar was comforting, almost friendly. He taxied to the runway and waited for the signal. 20 fighters took off together. Most were flown by replacements, boys who barely knew how to dogfight. Weber was one of only 3 veterans left in the squadron. They climbed to 27,000 feet. The sky was clear and blue. Beautiful. Deceptive. "Mustangs ahead," someone called. "Mustangs, a lot of them." Weber saw them, silver specks glinting in the afternoon sun. They were already positioned perfectly, high and fast, waiting. "Maintain formation," Weber ordered. "Don't break unless—" The Mustangs dove. They came down like avenging angels, 6 of them in perfect echelon. The lead plane opened fire and a Bf-109 exploded instantly. The formation scattered. Weber tried to turn into the attack, but another Mustang was already on his tail. He heard the hammering of guns, felt impacts shudder through his airframe. His left wing erupted in flames. He pulled the canopy release and hit the seat straps. The wind screamed as he tumbled into open air. He pulled the ripcord, the parachute deployed with a sharp jerk, and suddenly everything was quiet. He floated down through the silence, watching his plane spiral into the ground far below. Around him, other parachutes drifted, both German and American. The war looked small from up here, pointless. He landed hard in a wheat field, his ankle twisted, pain shooting up his leg. He struggled to his feet and collapsed the parachute. A farmer and his wife ran toward him from a nearby house. They were old, their faces carved by years and worry. "Are you hurt?" the farmer asked. Weber shook his head. "Where are we?" 15 kilometers from Nuremberg." Weber laughed bitterly. 15 kilometers from one of Germany's most important cities, and he was defeated by a plane built in California. The farmer helped him to the house. His wife brought water and bread. They were kind, these people, just trying to survive. "The Americans will be here soon," the farmer said quietly. "You should hide." Weber shook his head. "No more hiding. The war is over for me." That night, American troops arrived. Weber surrendered without resistance. They treated him correctly, following the rules of war. He was searched, documented, and given medical attention for his ankle. An American officer, a captain who spoke decent German, interviewed him. "You're Oberleutnant Franz Weber? 13 confirmed kills?" Weber nodded. "You were shot down by a Mustang?" "Yes." The captain smiled slightly. "You're not the first. Won't be the last either." Weber looked at him. "That plane, the Mustang, it changed everything." "I know," the captain said. "We built it to win, and it did."
Weber was quiet for a moment. Then, it wasn't just the plane. It was what the plane represented. Freedom, innovation. We were taught to obey. You were taught to think. That's why you won. The captain considered this. Maybe, but it cost a lot of men on both sides. Yes, Weber agreed. Too many. Meanwhile, Duke Fletcher was on his 27th mission. His kill count had reached 19. He was officially an ace 3 times over, but the numbers meant nothing anymore. They flew over Germany, escorting bombers to yet another factory. The resistance was lighter now. The Luftwaffe was running out of planes, fuel, and pilots. When they encountered a small group of German fighters, Fletcher almost felt sorry for them. They flew erratically, obviously inexperienced. The fight was over in seconds. As Fletcher turned for home, he saw a German pilot bail out. The parachute opened cleanly. The pilot would live. For some reason, that made Fletcher feel better. One less death. One man going home, even if it was to a defeated country. Back at base, Fletcher was called to the commander's office. He expected another medal ceremony or press interview. Instead, he found the squadron chaplain waiting. His stomach dropped. "Captain Fletcher," the chaplain said gently, "I'm afraid there's been news from home." Fletcher's younger brother, Michael, had been killed in the Pacific. His submarine was sunk off the coast of Japan. No survivors. Fletcher sat down heavily. The room spun. All this time he'd been fighting in Europe, shooting down enemy planes, thinking his family was safe. But the war had found them anyway. "I'm very sorry," the chaplain said. Fletcher nodded numbly. "Thank you." That night he didn't sleep. He sat outside his quarters, staring at the stars, thinking about Michael, about all the brothers and sons and fathers who would never come home. Tommy found him there at dawn. "I heard," Tommy said quietly. "I'm sorry, Duke."
Fletcher didn't respond at first. Then, softly. "We keep score, you know? 19 kills. Like it's a game. But every one of those was someone's brother, too." Tommy sat beside him. They watched the sun rise over the English countryside. Somewhere across the channel, other men were waking up to fly, to fight, to die. "What do we do?" Tommy asked. Fletcher stood up slowly. We finish it. We end this war so no one else has to lose a brother. They flew that day, and the next, and the one after that. The Mustangs continued their relentless campaign, grinding down what remained of the Luftwaffe. By August 1944, German fighter resistance had effectively collapsed. The skies over Europe belonged to the Allies. The Mustang had achieved what no one thought possible: complete air superiority. September 1944. The war was entering its final phase. Allied armies were advancing from the west. Soviet forces pushed from the east. Germany was being crushed between two unstoppable forces. In a prisoner of war camp in Belgium, Franz Weber found himself among hundreds of other Luftwaffe pilots. They were the survivors, the ones who had bailed out or crash-landed. Each had a story about the Mustang. One evening, they gathered in the barracks to share their experiences. It became a kind of therapy, acknowledging what they had faced. "I saw one Mustang destroy 4 of our planes in 90 seconds, one pilot said. "He didn't miss. Every burst found its target." "I tried to outrun one," another added. "I had my throttle at maximum, diving. He caught me like I was standing still." Weber listened to these stories, hearing his own experiences echoed. The Mustang had become a legend, a ghost story that haunted every German pilot. An older pilot, a veteran from the Battle of Britain, spoke quietly. "We were arrogant. We thought our victories in Poland, France, and England meant we were invincible. But the Americans learned from our tactics. They built a better plane, and they trained their pilots better. We lost because we stopped innovating." The group fell silent. It was a hard truth, but undeniable. Weber thought about the years of propaganda, the promises of wonder weapons and final victories, all lies. The real wonder weapon had been built in America, in a California factory, by engineers who were free to experiment and fail and try again. In England, Duke Fletcher received orders for a new type of mission. His squadron would fly low-level strafing runs, attacking German airfields and destroying planes on the ground. It was dangerous work. Anti-aircraft fire was thick at low altitude, but it was effective. Every plane destroyed on the ground was one that wouldn't challenge them in the air. Fletcher led his squadron over the Rhine, dropping to just 500 feet. They found a Luftwaffe base near Mannheim. Rows of fighters were parked in neat lines, sitting ducks. "Line 'em up," Fletcher ordered. "Make every shot count." They swept across the field at 350 miles per hour, guns hammering. Aircraft exploded, fuel tanks erupted in flames. Ground crew ran for cover. Fletcher felt no satisfaction, only grim necessity. These planes would never fly again. German pilots would never die in them. In a twisted way, he was saving lives. As they climbed away from the burning airfield, Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. "Duke, we just destroyed at least 30 planes." "Yeah," Fletcher replied. 30 men who get to go home alive." The campaign continued through autumn. The Mustang pilots became janitors, cleaning up what remained of the Luftwaffe. Some days they flew 2 missions, sometimes 3. The work was exhausting but necessary. By October, Fletcher's kill count had reached 24, but he had stopped keeping track. The number was meaningless. What mattered was that bomber crews were coming home. What mattered was that the war was ending. One afternoon, Fletcher was called to headquarters. General Spaatz himself wanted to meet with him. Fletcher entered the office and saluted. Spaatz returned the gesture and gestured to a chair. "Captain Fletcher, I wanted to personally thank you. Your squadron has been instrumental in achieving air superiority. The bomber crews call you guardian angels." Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "Just doing my job, sir." It's more than that. The P-51 Mustang changed this war, but it's pilots like you who made it a war-winning weapon. You took a good plane and turned it into a legend." Fletcher looked down. "Sir, with respect, I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a survivor."
Spots nodded slowly. "That's what makes you a good officer. You understand the cost." He paused. "The war in Europe will be over soon, maybe by spring. When it ends, men like you will go home and try to forget. But history won't forget. What you did here mattered." Fletcher met his eyes. "What about the men who didn't make it home? Do they matter?" "More than anything," Spot said quietly. "That's why we have to win, to make sure their sacrifice meant something." Fletcher saluted and left. As he walked back to his quarters, he thought about his brother, Michael, about the German pilots he'd shot down, about Tommy Grant and the hundreds of young men on both sides who would carry these memories forever. That night, he wrote a letter to Michael's widow. He told her that her husband's death wasn't in vain, that the war would end soon, that the world would be better afterward. He didn't know if he believed it, but he hoped it was true. April 1945. The war was in its death throes. Berlin was surrounded. Hitler was in his bunker. The Reich that promised 1,000 years was collapsing after 12. Duke Fletcher flew his final combat mission on April 16, 1945. His squadron was assigned to escort bombers to a rail yard near Leipzig. Intelligence reported minimal resistance. Most German fighters were grounded due to lack of fuel. The mission was almost routine. They flew in, the bombers dropped their payload, they turned for home. No enemy aircraft, no combat. Just another day in a war that was almost over. But as they crossed back into Allied territory, Fletcher saw something that made his chest tighten. Below, a German transport plane was attempting to land at an Allied-held airfield. White sheets hung from its windows. Surrender flags. Fletcher watched as it touched down gently. Ground crews surrounded it. German soldiers climbed out, hands raised. The war was ending, one plane at a time. When Fletcher landed back at base, he climbed out of his Mustang and placed his hand on the fuselage. The plane was scarred, patched, worn, but still flying, still strong. "We made it, girl. We actually made it." His final tally: 24 confirmed kills, 7 probables, countless ground targets destroyed. But the number he was most proud of was different. 157 missions flown. 157 times he brought his plane home. 157 times he and his wingmen survived. Tommy Grant finished with 9 kills. He would go home to Texas, marry his sweetheart, then never talk about the war. The memories were too heavy. In the POW camp, Franz Weber learned that Germany had surrendered on May 8, 1945. The announcement was met not with despair, but with relief. The dying could finally stop. Weber was repatriated to Germany in June. He returned to find his hometown in ruins. His family had survived, living in the basement of what used to be their home. His brother Carl had never been sent to the front. He was alive. They embraced for a long time, neither speaking. Later, Carl asked, "Was it true? The Americans really had a plane that beat us?" Weber nodded. "The P-51 Mustang. It was faster, had more range, and better pilots. But more than that, it represented something we had lost: innovation, freedom, the willingness to try new things. Did you hate them, the Americans?" Weber thought about the pilot who shot him down. Professional,
precise, probably scared just like he had been. "No," Weber said finally. "They were just men doing their job, like I was. The real enemy was the system that put us in those planes in the first place." He never flew again. The thought of climbing into a cockpit made his hands shake. But he would sometimes visit air shows, watching planes perform aerobatics, and whenever he saw a restored P-51 Mustang, gleaming silver in the sun, he felt a strange mix of respect and sorrow. That plane had destroyed his Air Force, his country, his youth. But it had, in a way, freed him from the lies, from the propaganda, from the illusion of invincibility. Years later, in 1961, Franz Weber attended an aviation museum opening in Munich. On display was a restored FW-190, the type he had flown. Next to it, separated by a velvet rope, stood a P-51 Mustang. Weber stood between them for a long time, studying both. An American veteran, there with his family, noticed Weber's interest. "Beautiful planes," the American said in broken German. Weber nodded. "Yes, very beautiful." "Did you fly?" the American asked. "FW-190. You?" "Mustang." They looked at each other. Two old men who had once tried to kill each other, now standing side by side. "I'm sorry," Weber said suddenly. "For the war. For everything." The American was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand. "We were all sorry, but it's over now." Weber shook his hand. The grip was firm, genuine. They stood together, looking at the planes, relics of a war that had consumed millions, monuments to human ingenuity and human cruelty in equal measure. "The Mustang was a remarkable machine," Weber said softly. The American smiled. "It was, but I'm glad we don't need it anymore." Weber agreed. "Yes, may we never need such machines again." The P-51 Mustang flew its last combat mission for the U.S. military in 1953 during the Korean War. By then, jets had taken over the skies. But its legacy endured. Duke Fletcher returned to Texas, became a crop duster, and eventually a flight instructor. He taught a generation of young pilots, always emphasizing one lesson: technology wins battles, but humanity wins wars. Never forget that. He died in 1987, surrounded by family. At his funeral, 6 P-51 Mustangs flew overhead in missing man formation. Tommy Grant became a school teacher. He never spoke about his war experiences until a student asked him point blank if he'd killed anyone. Tommy looked at the young face and said, "Yes, and it's something I'll carry forever. War isn't glory, it's just survivors and ghosts." Franz Weber worked as an engineer in post-war Germany, helping rebuild the country he had fought for. He wrote a memoir in 1972 titled Der Silberne Geist, The Silver Ghost. In it, he wrote, "We called it the ghost because it seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with deadly precision, and vanish. But the real ghost was our own arrogance. We thought we were unbeatable. The Mustang proved us wrong, not with cruelty, but with superiority. That is the hardest kind of defeat to accept." The book became a bestseller in Germany, required reading in military academies. It was one of the first honest accounts of the Luftwaffe's collapse. In 1978, the Experimental Aircraft Association organized a reunion of P-51 pilots and Luftwaffe veterans. Over 300 men attended. They shared stories, shed tears, and found something unexpected: understanding. Franz Weber met a former Mustang pilot named Robert Yates.
They discovered they had fought over the same battlefield on March 14, 1944. Yates had shot down 2 FW-190s that day. Weber had lost his wingman. "It might have been me," Yates said quietly. Weber shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. We were both just trying to survive." They became friends, exchanged letters, visited each other's countries, and when Yates died in 1983, Weber attended his funeral in Virginia. The P-51 Mustang remains one of the most celebrated aircraft in history. Museums around the world display them. Collectors restore them with obsessive care. Air shows feature them prominently. But beyond the metal and machinery, beyond the statistics and kill counts, the Mustang represents something deeper. It represents the moment when American industrial might, innovative spirit, and pilot courage converged to achieve what seemed impossible: total air superiority against a battle-hardened enemy. The Germans never imagined that a plane built in 120 days by a company with no fighter experience would destroy the Luftwaffe. But that's exactly what happened. Not through brutality, not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior engineering, better tactics, and the courage of young men who climbed into silver planes and flew into hell. The smell of aviation fuel, the roar of the Merlin engine, the sight of a Mustang climbing into the sun, these became the symbols of Allied victory in the air. And for the men who flew them, and the men who fought against them, the Mustang would forever be the silver ghost that changed the sky, ended an era, and proved that sometimes the impossible is simply what no one has achieved yet. The war ended. The planes were mothballed. The pilots went home. But the legend lived on. In museums, in books, in the memories of old men who still wake at night hearing the sound of engines and guns. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win the air war. It showed the world that freedom, innovation, and courage could overcome even the most formidable enemy. And that lesson, more than any victory, is what truly changed history.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.